Hi guys and welcome to Calm Night Radio channel. Tonight we step into a place that wakes before the sun, where the air is already heavy, the ground already scarred, and thousands of ordinary moments are shaped by force long before breakfast. What does morning feel like when your body is counted before your name is spoken? What does a field look like when wealth grows there, but not for the hands that tend it? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And while you're here, tell me your location and local time in the comments, because somewhere in the world another listener is probably getting sleepy with you right now. Now, dim the lights, and you wake in darkness that is not fully night and not yet morning. The room around you is small, close, and stale with the smell of smoke that never quite leaves the boards. Damp earth presses up through the floor. A faint draught slips through the cracks in the wall and brushes your ankle like cold fingers. Someone nearby shifts on a rough blanket. A child coughs once, then settles. The sound is tiny, but in the quiet it seems to fill the whole cabin. Outside, no rooster sings for your comfort. No sunrise belongs to you. The day begins because someone else has decided that it begins. You lie still for a moment and listen. There is the low murmur of breathing, the creak of wood, the soft scratch of cloth against straw. Beyond the door, the plantation is starting to stir with the restrained noises of labour waiting to happen. A footstep in dirt, the distant clank of a tool, the faint splash of water from a bucket lifted in haste. Morning comes gently to the sky, but never gently here. When you sit up, the air feels cool on your face and rough on your throat. Ash lingers from last night's fire. It smells bitter and comforting at the same time. That is one of the strange tricks of plantation life. Even hardship can become familiar enough to feel almost tender for a second. Almost. Then the feeling passes. Your clothing is plain, worn, and rubbed thin in places where labour always bites first. The fabric scratches at your shoulders. Your bare feet meet packed dirt. The ground is cold, but not for long. Soon the heat will rise. Soon the sun will press down with such steady force that even breathing can feel like work. For now, dawn gives you a few quiet minutes, and even those are not truly yours. You step outside. Mist hangs low over the landscape. It softens the edges of everything, the cabins, the path, the nearest outbuildings, the fields beyond. In another setting, it might look beautiful. Here it feels like a curtain pulled over a stage where the same play is performed every day. The smell of wet soil drifts upward. So does the sweeter scent of crushed leaves, and beneath both, the sharper odour of animals, sweat, and old wood. The plantation is not one thing. It is many worlds pressed together under one authority. There is the large house that rises with more windows, more air, more room than anyone in the cabins can imagine as normal. There are kitchens, sheds, fences, smokehouses, yards, paths beaten flat by constant feet, and broad working spaces that stretch farther than seems reasonable. On some plantations in 1730, tobacco dominates the land. On others, rice or indigo begins to shape the rhythm of labour. Each crop has its own demands, its own tyranny, and its own way of stealing the body a little at a time. You see how everything is arranged to be watched. That is one of the first lessons of the morning. Space itself can be a command. Cabins placed close enough to monitor, paths kept clear, work areas exposed, doors that open toward supervision rather than privacy. Historians still argue over how much freedom enslaved people could carve from the physical layout of early plantations, because the record often preserves the owner's pen more clearly than the worker's footsteps. But the feeling is easy enough to imagine. You know when a place has been built to contain you? Nearby, another door opens. A woman steps out carrying a small pot. Her movements are efficient, practiced, and careful with energy. She does not waste motion. Nobody here can afford to. A man bends to tie a scrap of cloth around his wrist where the skin has split. Two children stand together in silence. not because they are naturally quiet, but because they have learned what kind of morning this is. The sky lightens from black to deep blue to a grey that hints at coming gold. It happens quickly now. The plantation wakes with it. More figures emerge. Some move stiffly. Some move quickly to prepare food, tools, or water. Some keep their faces unreadable, a skill so valuable it might as well be another form of currency. You learn early that expression can be dangerous when every glance is interpreted by someone with power. A horn, bell, or shouted order may summon the day, depending on the place and the habit of the owner. The sound cuts through the dawn and gathers the scattered movements into one direction. There it is. No poetry left now. The workday has called. You join the flow of bodies moving across the yard. The ground is uneven underfoot. Dew wets your skin. Someone beside you smells faintly of wood smoke and crushed herbs. Another carries the lingering salt of yesterday's sweat. The senses become sharp in these moments. You notice everything because everything matters. The mood in a voice, the speed of a step, the angle of a supervisor's head. Plantation life trains attention into survival. The people around you come from different beginnings, even when the system tries to flatten them into one category. Some were born in the colonies, some were born in Africa, and carry languages in their memory that no one in the big house understands. In 1730, many plantations still held people with direct ties to West and Central African homelands, and that mattered deeply. Farming knowledge, cooking methods, beliefs about healing, naming, music. And kinship all moved with them, even when chains tried to stop every other journey. A plantation owner might see labour. You see skill, memory, and 100 private worlds hidden behind tired eyes. That hidden knowledge shapes the morning in quiet ways. A woman knots a cloth with a method learned from another coast. A man studies the wetness of the soil with an experienced glance. Someone hums under their breath, just low enough that it stays personal. The tune is not performance. It is steadiness. A hand resting for 1 second on another shoulder is not just habit. It is reassurance. Tiny things. Necessary things. You pass the larger house and smell bread, fat, and something richer cooking inside. The scent drifts into the yard like a deliberate insult. Hunger lives close to labour here. On many plantations, food allowances are rationed, uneven, and rarely generous. Yet morning still requires fuel, so people make do with what they have, sometimes cornmeal, sometimes leftovers, sometimes whatever can be stretched without complaint becoming visible. Nobody writes poems about watered porridge, but perhaps they should. It has carried more history than fancy tables ever did. There is a bitter little joke hidden in the scene. The plantation pretends to run on discipline, but it actually runs on improvisation. Owners boast of order, efficiency, and management. Meanwhile, the people forced to labour are the ones who know how to mend tools, read weather, soothe fevers, patch walls, settle children, save seeds, carry news, and keep the whole fragile machine from collapsing under its own cruelty. Grand claims on one side, real competence on the other. History can be very impolite that way. As the sun finally edges upward, colour returns to the world. Clay turns redder, grass brightens, wood grain stands out, skin shines with dampness. The fields begin to reveal their scale. Rows extend farther than your sleepy mind wants to accept. The work ahead is visible now, which somehow makes it heavier. You breathe in slowly. The air is thick with river moisture and churned dirt. In some coastal places, especially rice country, the wet ground holds a heavy, green smell that clings to the nose. Mosquitoes rise from low places. Water glimmers where it should not. Rice plantations would later become infamous for exhausting labour in tidal fields and dangerous disease environments. An African expertise in rice cultivation was one reason planters sought certain captives from specific regions. That ugly truth hides inside the landscape. Skill is admired only when stolen. But this morning is not just about systems. It is about you standing there while the light grows stronger and the day reaches for your body again. You look around and understand that plantation time is different from ordinary time. It is measured in tasks, surveillance, and endurance. A minute before the signal feels brief and precious. An hour in the field can feel endless. A season is counted in planting, cutting, curing, hauling. A year is marked not by celebration but by who has been sold, who has died, who has arrived, who has survived another harvest. And yet, inside that harsh rhythm, life does not vanish. Someone whispers a name with affection. Someone adjusts a child's shirt. Someone shares a mouthful of food before the line starts moving faster. Human warmth persists with almost annoying stubbornness. It refuses to disappear just because the setting deserves no softness. There are no easy heroes in this dawn scene, and certainly no noble plantation simplicity. That myth belongs in the rubbish heap. Early plantations were places of profit built from coerced labour, legal inequality, and constant threat. By 1730, colonial law in many places had already hardened race-based slavery into daily reality. Punishment was not an exception hovering at the edge of life, it was part of the design. So was family separation, so was forced work, so was the belief, repeated in law and custom, that black lives could be owned. And still, the morning contains gestures the law cannot fully command. A woman lifts her chin at the first touch of warmth on her face, as if greeting the sun on her own terms. A man murmurs a phrase from memory in a language the overseer does not know. A child looks at a bird perched on a fence and smiles for one forbidden second. Little acts, almost invisible. But invisible is not the same as unimportant. One curious detail from early plantation life surprises many people. Some enslaved Africans and African Americans used small personal objects, beads, charms, carved pieces, roots, or wrapped bundles, as quiet forms of spiritual protection or remembrance. Owners often dismiss such things as nonsense when they notice them at all. That was their mistake. Power loves to mock what it cannot interpret. Meanwhile, meaning survives in a pocket, around a neck, under a sleeping mat, hidden in plain sight. The call to move comes again, sharper now. The line forms more tightly. The plantation has stopped clearing its throat and started speaking. Your body responds almost before thought does. Stand here, carry this. Walk now. It is not obedience born of agreement, it is knowledge shaped by consequence. You begin to move toward the day's labour. The earth is softer where many feet have passed. Fine grit sticks to your skin. The morning chill fades and the first true warmth touches the back of your neck. Birds stir in the trees, absurdly cheerful. A cartwheel grinds somewhere behind you. Voices rise and fall. Some are clipped with command. Some stay low and private. Above all of it, the plantation creates its own rough music. Bucket handles knocking together, wood creaking, tools striking, footsteps sinking into rhythm. This is how the day starts. Not with peace, not with choice, but with waking, gathering, noticing, enduring. You walk into the new light with others who know this landscape too well. You carry tiredness. You carry caution. You carry memories the plantation did not give you, around you. The morning broadens into full day, and every smell, sound, and texture settles into place as if rehearsed. Smoke thins into the air, dew lifts, orders sharpen, work waits. And you keep walking, because in 1730 on an early plantation, dawn is not a beginning full of promise. It is an arrival. You come back to the cabins when the chance appears, and the place looks different in full light. At dawn, the row of dwellings seemed half swallowed by mist. Now every hard detail shows itself plainly. The walls are rough planks, sometimes warped, sometimes patched with whatever scrap could be found, traded or salvaged. The wood is sun-bleached on one side and darkened by smoke on the other. Mud presses into the cracks. In places, Old cloth has been stuffed into openings to block drafts. In other places, the wind still slips through, as if the wall were only making a polite suggestion. This is home. Though that word has to do a great deal of work, you stand near the doorway and smell the familiar blend of smoke, damp earth, sweat, ash, and cooked cornmeal that never fully leaves the air. It is a lived-in smell, layered and persistent. It clings to blankets, to hair, to skin, to memory. The cabins on early plantations were often built with speed rather than care, because comfort for black people was never the priority. Shelter was expected to be functional enough to preserve labour, and little more. Yet inside these narrow rooms, people still tried to create order, beauty, and a kind of guarded warmth. When you duck through the doorway, your shoulders almost turn by instinct. The opening is low, and the room within feels smaller than it did in darkness. Sunlight enters in thin, sharp stripes through gaps in the boards. Dust drifts through those beams with lazy confidence, as if this tiny room were a cathedral. It is not. But the light can be so lovely that it briefly seems unfair. Your feet meet packed dirt. Some cabins had wooden floors, especially in places with different building habits or greater investment from owners. But many early dwellings for enslaved people had earthen floors that turned cold in winter and tacky after rain. Dirt remembers everything. It holds the shape of repeated footsteps. It gathers ash from the fire. It takes the drip of broth, the scrape of stools, the fall of crumbs. It also keeps the chill. On a humid day, the floor can feel clammy underfoot, as if the ground itself is breathing. A hearth or small fireplace anchors the room, though anchor might be too reassuring a word. The fire offers heat, light, and a way to cook, but it also blackens the walls and fills the cabin with smoke that stings the eyes and scratches the throat. You can smell old pine, charred grease, and damp kindling. The soot settles into the wood grain until the boards look permanently shadowed. Nothing in here stays fresh for long. A few sleeping spaces line the wall, simple pallets, straw, quilts if fortune and labour have allowed them, blankets if they have survived enough seasons. The fabric is coarse and rubbed thin. One corner of a covering has been mended with thread in a different colour. Careful little stitches that catch the light. That small repair says more than it seems. It tells you someone refused to let the cloth fall apart without a fight. Furnishings are sparse. A stool, a box, a pot, a wooden spoon worn smooth from repeated handling, a gourd container, a peg in the wall with a garment hanging from it. The cabin does not contain excess because excess belongs elsewhere. Every object earns its place. There is a practical elegance in that, though nobody here chose the hardship that made such elegance necessary. You notice how people arrange the little they possess with real intention. A blanket folded away from the draught, a tool tucked within easy reach, a small bundle hidden from careless eyes, a pot placed close to warmth. Sometimes the order is almost ceremonial. In a life shaped by someone else's commands, choosing where to put a cup or how to fold a cloth can become a tiny declaration of self. Privacy hardly exists. That may be the harshest detail once the room settles around you. Lives overlap here without pause. Sleep, illness, childbirth, grief, whispers, laughter, arguments, prayer, and silence all happen in shared air. The cabin hears everything. There is little room to retreat from other people, and no safe room at all to retreat from the system surrounding the cabin. Children wake at night. Adults murmur after dark. Someone snores. Someone groans from a long ache in the back or shoulders. Someone tries not to cry loudly enough for others to notice. Thin walls make private sorrow a community sound. And still, people find ways to carve space from closeness. A lowered voice can build a corner. A glance can close a door that wood cannot. A cloth hung between sleeping places can suggest modesty, even when the gesture is fragile. A body turned toward the wall says, "Not now." These are quiet negotiations, practiced daily. No law records them. No plantation ledger values them. Yet they matter because they make crowded life slightly more livable. The cabin changes through the seasons with stubborn improvisation. In colder months, every crack becomes an enemy. Smoke thickens because openings are covered more tightly. Moisture beads on the inner walls. Fingers stiffen. Breath shows in the air, in hotter weather. The room turns close and breathless. The roof seems to push heat downward. Flies drift in. Mosquitoes whine near the ear. The smell of damp bedding and warm bodies intensifies. Sleep can become a battle of its own. A small child sits near the hearth, tracing a line in the dirt with one finger. The gesture is absent-minded and precise. Children in these cabins learned the environment early, learned which objects were useful, which corners were warmer, which adults could soothe fear with a look alone. Plantation childhood was never protected in the way white families like to imagine childhood should be. Even so, games appeared when they could. Rhymes surfaced. Tiny toys might be made from corn husks, scraps of cloth, pebbles, or carved wood. Human beings remain inconveniently imaginative even in miserable conditions. One quirky detail historians sometimes recover from archaeology is how much broken pottery, beads, pins, buttons, pipe fragments, and animal bones can reveal about cabin life. A lost bead near a doorway, a hidden cache of shells, a cooking pot repaired again and again. All of it suggests choices made under pressure. The soil becomes a witness when the written record refuses to be one. Historians debate exactly how much can be confidently inferred from those finds, because objects speak softly and context can be slippery. Even so, a cabin site often tells a richer truth than the owner ever intended. You reach toward the wall and feel the wood. It is splintered in one place, polished smooth in another. Daily contact has worn certain spots down. Door frame, stool edge, lip of the table, handle of the pot. Repetition leaves its mark. So does care. A thing touched often becomes familiar enough to seem almost companionable. There may be more than one family in a single cabin, or relatives arranged in a pattern that makes sense only from within. Kinship on early plantations did not always fit the owner's categories. Blood ties mattered, but so did chosen bonds, step relations, elders who took on grandparent roles, women who nursed children not born to them, men who offered guidance without legal recognition of fatherhood. The white legal system excelled at denying black family legitimacy. Yet black families continued to exist with great determination. The cabin is one of the places where that determination becomes visible in daily practice. You hear a woman speaking softly while she braids another's hair. The sound is low and steady, almost like the murmur of water moving over stones. Hair care is not vanity here. It is hygiene, tenderness, identity, and skill. African hair traditions did not vanish on contact with plantation life. Styles changed under pressure. Materials shifted, and time became scarce. But grooming remained a deeply meaningful act. Fingers part, smooth, twist, and tie. The scalp feels the gentle pull. The room takes on the faint scent of oil or animal fat mixed with herbs. For a few minutes, care outruns hardship. Then there is the constant question of ownership, not of land or house, but of the body within it. You may sleep in the cabin, tend it, repair it, even fill it with the sounds of family. But the plantation insists on reminding you that none of it is secure. A dwelling can feel intimate and temporary at the same time. That is one of slavery's cruelest tricks. It teaches attachment while threatening removal. A storm can make the cabin miserable within minutes. Rain rattles the roof, then finds every weakness. Water slips through seams, drips into bedding, darkens the dirt floor, and turns the whole room into a map of damp trouble. People set pots under the leaks. They move blankets. They curse softly or laugh with disbelief because sometimes laughter is easier than despair. The smell after rainfall is strong. Wet soil. Smoke revived by moisture. Mildew beginning its quiet campaign. The air feels thick enough to drink. At night, when the weather is still, the cabin carries sounds from all around. Insects sing. Frogs pulse from the low ground. Someone coughs in the next dwelling. A baby fusses and is soothed. A burst of laughter rises, then falls quickly. A whispered prayer slips through the boards. Farther off, a dog barks. Sometimes the big house sends its own noises into the dark. Music, footsteps, a door shut sharply, and those sounds drift over the cabins as reminders that surveillance never fully sleeps. Yet the cabin is not merely a site of suffering. That would be too simple, and simple stories usually flatter the powerful. The cabin is also where recipes survive in altered form, where names are spoken correctly, where elders pass on warnings, where songs are tested quietly, where scraps are turned useful, where worn hands do patient work by weak light. It is where people reclaim pieces of time the workday tries to swallow whole. You might watch someone shape a broom from local brush, mend a basket, patch a sleeve, carve a peg, stir a pot, or tuck away a seed for later planting. Such acts look ordinary. They are ordinary. That is precisely why they matter. Ordinary life under extraordinary injustice is still life. It contains skill, taste, preference, memory, annoyance, affection, and all the other textures historians once ignored in favour of grand men with property. The cabin can hold fear and comfort in the same hour. That contradiction lingers in every corner. A child may feel safest here, pressed against familiar fabric and soot-dark walls. An adult may look at the same room and see a place too small to protect anyone. Both feelings can be true at once. The afternoon heat settles in and the room grows close. Smoke lingers beneath the roof. Light shifts across the wall and turns golden, then dull. You can hear the faint scrape of movement outside, the passing of feet, the rustle of leaves beyond the yard. The cabin breathes with the day, never fully quiet, never fully still. On some evenings, the room would smell of stewed greens, cornmeal, or beans if provisions allowed it. On leaner days, the scent would be thinner, harsher, less comforting. On all days, the meal had to be made, shared, stretched, and swallowed. Eating here was rarely elegant, but hunger has no interest in etiquette. You notice a small decoration near the sleeping area, perhaps a shell, a bit of coloured cloth, a carved mark, something too modest for an outsider to notice twice. That is enough. People decorate because the spirit resists blankness. Even one deliberate touch can say this place contains persons, not inventory. The cabin teaches you how much dignity can live in cramped conditions. It also teaches you how fragile dignity can feel when every surrounding structure is built to insult it. The dirt floor stays cold, the smoke keeps stinging, the walls remain thin, the room remains overcrowded. Nothing about this should be romanticized. But inside that reality, black life in 1730 still produces care, order, humour, and discipline that the plantation never earns and never deserves. By the time the light begins to soften, the cabin has shown you its truth. It is rough shelter. It is a workshop. It is a nursery. It is a sick room. It is a kitchen. It is a whispered meeting place. It is a fragile claim on belonging made in a world determined to deny that claim. And when you stand in the doorway once more, breathing smoke, earth, and evening air together, you understand something plain and powerful. The cabin was built cheaply. The life inside it was not. By the time the sun has fully claimed the sky, your body is already at work. The day does not ease you into labour. It takes hold at once. Hands close around tools still rough from yesterday. Baskets wait to be filled. Hoes bite the ground in a steady rhythm that soon becomes the sound of the morning itself. The field spreads out before you, in long rows that seem to promise the same task forever, and the promise is kept with remarkable dedication. You step into the crop line with others, and the earth is damp at first. Soil presses cool against your feet or through worn shoes if you are fortunate enough to have them. The scent rises sharply when the blade breaks the ground. Wet clay, crushed roots, green leaves, stale water in the low places. The smell is strong enough to settle in your nose for hours. Soon, sweat adds its own salt to everything. Field labour on early plantations was relentless because the crop demanded it, and profit demanded more. In the Chesapeake, tobacco ruled many lives with its fussy, exhausting needs. It had to be planted, hoed, wormed, cut, hung, and watched with care. In the low country, rice work could be even more punishing, with tasks carried out in wet fields, draining heat from the body while insects swarmed and disease flourished nearby. Indigo, too, was valued for the blue dye it produced, though the process of preparing it was foul-smelling and labour-intensive. The crop changes the details. It never changes the fact of coercion. You bend, lift, strike, pull, step, then again and again. The rhythm settles into your shoulders first. After that, your lower back begins its complaint, then the neck, then the palms. Labour has a way of introducing itself to each part of the body one by one, as if politely making acquaintance before deciding to stay all day. By noon, there is no mystery left. Every muscle understands the arrangement. An overseer, driver, or owner may keep watch, depending on the plantation and the task. Supervision hangs over the field like weather. It may be loud, full of orders and threats, or it may be quieter, which can be worse. Silence from power often means it is measuring. People learn to read distance, posture, and mood with exhausting precision. A figure on horseback approaching from the edge of the field can tighten a dozen stomachs before a single word is spoken. Some plantations used gang labour, especially for crops that required many people working in close coordination from sunup to sundown. Under that system, the pace of the group set the pace of the individual, which meant bodies were driven together and watched together. Other places, especially in parts of rice country later on, developed task systems in which a person was assigned a specific amount of work to finish. That could sometimes create narrow spaces of time once the assigned labour was complete. Though such space was never a gift, it was squeezed from the plantation's logic, not offered from kindness. Historians still dispute how much autonomy task labour truly allowed in the early 18th century, because the answer changed from place to place and season to season. For you, the most important fact is simpler. The work is hard. It is repetitive. It fills the whole horizon. The sun climbs higher and the early cool disappears. Heat settles on the back of your neck with insulting confidence. The shirt sticks to your skin. Sweat gathers along the spine and inside the elbows. Gnats hover at your face. Flies insist on your mouth, your eyes, your patience. The tool handle grows slick in your hand. You tighten your grip and continue. Conversation in the fields is limited, careful, and often half swallowed by labour. Now and then a few words pass, a warning, a joke too dry to count as cheerful, a name, a muttered complaint aimed at the dirt rather than the heavens. Sometimes a song rises in fragments, not always to entertain, but to measure rhythm, steady breathing, or remind the body that it belongs to more than the row in front of it. A work song can be practical and defiant at once. That is elegant. Really. Also inconvenient for anyone who imagines oppression can flatten the human voice completely. The work itself changes through the season. Planting requires one rhythm, weeding another, harvest another still. Tobacco demands delicate handling at certain stages, though delicate does not mean easy. Leaves must be tended with care because the market rewards quality, and of course the market never thanks the hands that preserve it. Rice work can involve standing for long periods in wet ground, with all the misery that implies. Mud grips the ankle, water reflects sunlight straight into the eyes, mosquitoes rise in little clouds from the edges. The smell of stagnant pools blends with green growth and human sweat, until the whole field feels alive in the least pleasant way possible. You begin to notice how labour is divided, though never fairly. Men, women, and children all work, but the exact tasks can vary by age, strength, status, and local custom. Women may labour in the fields while also carrying responsibility for cooking, cleaning, mending, and childcare when the formal workday loosens its grip. Children may fetch water, scare birds from crops, gather kindling, or perform smaller tasks that introduce them to labour long before anyone would dare call them grown. Childhood here is not spared, it is recruited. That truth sits heavy in the air. A young boy struggles with a load that rocks in his arms. A girl stands with serious eyes and a stillness that looks too old for her size. Nobody needs a speech to understand what is happening. Plantation labour trains bodies early because the plantation wants usefulness before it allows full growth. One of the bitter facts of early American slavery is how quickly a child could be pulled into the economy of work, not as a helper in any gentle sense, but as labour in formation. Not all work happens in the fields. Some enslaved black people spend the day in domestic service, and that labour carries its own strain. Inside the larger house, women and men may cook, clean, wash, serve meals, care for children, make beds, carry chamber pots, polish metal, tend fires, and remain constantly available to the moods of white households. Domestic labour often took place under closer observation, which could mean slightly different clothing, slightly different food access, or slightly less exposure to field heat. But none of that made the work free or safe. Proximity to the owner's family could bring increased surveillance, sexual danger, emotional strain, and the constant demand to appear invisible while always being useful. Kitchen work alone is a world. The heat from the fire swells the room, fat spatters, bread bakes, meat smokes, pots simmer. Water must be hauled, ash must be cleared, floors must be scrubbed, knives must stay sharp. The smells are intense. Onions, lard, herbs, yeast, singed cloth, grease on iron. A cook holds immense practical knowledge, yet the praise lands elsewhere when the meal reaches the table. Plantation life has a real talent for stealing credit and calling it order. There are also skilled labourers, carpenters, coopers, blacksmiths, boatmen, brickmakers, sawyers, mill workers, and others whose days are governed by craft as much as by brute force. Such skill could make a person valuable in the narrow, dangerous sense that owners prize profitable talent. A blacksmith, for example, might shape hinges, tools, nails, and fittings essential to the plantation's daily function. The forge would roar with heat, iron would glow, sweat would sting the eyes, hammer blows would ring out in hard, bright notes across the yard. Skilled labour sometimes brought a measure of movement or bargaining power, but it also made a person more tightly bound to the needs of the estate. Value under slavery was never security. It was simply another form of exploitation dressed in praise. By midday, hunger begins to speak more loudly. The stomach tightens. The mouth dries. A pause for food, if granted, is brief and practical. There is no leisurely meal under a tree with thoughtful conversation about the weather. Food is swallowed quickly because labour is waiting to continue. Cornmeal, scraps, perhaps something salted, perhaps less. Water, if available, feels warm already. Still, even a short pause matters. Bodies lean, back straighten for a minute, eyes lift to the sky. The brief rest enters the muscles like a rumour. Then it is over. Afternoon work often feels longer than morning work, though the hours may not be so different. The body has lost its freshness. The heat grows thicker. The field begins to shimmer at the edges. Fatigue does strange things to time. Minutes stretch. Sounds repeat. The scrape of hose, the rustle of leaves, the call of insects, the distant barking of orders. All of it loops until the day feels trapped inside itself. You learn to manage effort with great intelligence, though the plantation would never call it intelligence. A slightly altered grip saves the palm. A careful shift of weight protects the knee. A practiced pace prevents collapse before dusk. Seasoned workers know how to conserve motion, how to hide a breath, how to steal one heartbeat of rest while appearing to continue. That is knowledge earned in the sternest school possible. One overlooked detail of plantation labour is just how much environmental knowledge enslaved workers possessed. They knew soils, weather shifts, drainage patterns, insect habits, seed timing, and the temper of animals. In rice regions especially, planters often depended on African expertise drawn from areas where rice cultivation was already well understood. Colonial records admitted this only unevenly, because giving proper credit would have spoiled the fantasy of white mastery. Reality, as usual, was much less flattering. The labour is not just physical, it is mental. You're always calculating. How close is the overseer? Who looks unsteady? Is a storm building? Can that tool be repaired? Is someone ill? How much daylight remains? Is punishment brewing in a silence that has gone too still? The mind never gets to wander far. Even daydreams must be brief, and perhaps that is one reason memory matters so much. A remembered song, a remembered face, a remembered story from another shore or another settlement can keep the self from shrinking entirely into the task at hand. Sometimes the field breaks into a sudden moment of disruption. A tool snaps. A mule refuses a command. Rain arrives fast and wild. A person stumbles from heat or weakness. These moments reveal the whole plantation at once. Orders sharpen, bodies pivot, tension rises, yet they also reveal who truly keeps things moving. Someone improvises a repair, someone lifts the fallen worker, someone calms the animal, someone knows where shelter is nearest. Systems of domination like to describe themselves as strong. In practice, they are constantly being rescued by the people they oppress. As the light begins to lower, labour changes its texture. The heat softens a little, but exhaustion deepens. The arms feel heavier than they should. Dirt clings to the skin in muddy streaks. Clothing stiffens with sweat and dust. The smell of the field settles into you until it seems there is no difference between body and landscape. Shoulders ache with a deep, tired heat. Hands buzz faintly from repeated strain. The day's work lingers in the joints before it is even done. And still, the signal to stop does not come immediately. The plantation always tries to take one more task, one more row, one more load, one more trip, one more proof that the body can be spent past reason. When at last the labour loosens, it is not the kind release that free people like to romanticize. It is merely the end of one set of demands before the next begins. Tools must be returned or checked. Animals may need tending. Water must be fetched. Food must be prepared. Clothing must be mended. Children must be watched. Illness must be managed. There is no clean border between work and life because slavery is designed to erase that border completely. Still, when the field finally lets you go, the evening air feels different on your skin. It carries dust, smoke, and the faint sweetness of crushed plants cooling after the sun. The sounds shift too. Hose fall quiet, wheels slow, voices grow lower. Birds take over the sky again with their unreasonable optimism. You walk back with the others, tired in the bones, sore in places no one will name, and still very much alive. That matters. It should not be remarkable. But under a labour regime built to consume human strength, survival at day's end can feel like a private achievement. This was the working day on many early plantations in 1730. Long hours, sharp oversight, endless repetition, physical skill without ownership, knowledge without recognition, fatigue without pity. Yet, within it all, black labourers carried memory, judgment, humour, craft, and endurance into every row, every hearth, every workshop, every yard. The plantation claimed the work. It never fully claimed the worker. By the time food appears, it has already been earned several times over. That is one of the cruel little truths of plantation life. The meal arrives late, thin, or hurried, yet the labour behind it begins long before the pot is set near the fire. Someone has carried water, someone has ground corn, someone has stirred, watched, scraped, salted, stretched, and prayed that the portion would hold. Hunger waits for none of this with any gratitude. You feel it first as a hollow under the ribs, then as a faint sharpness, then as a steady presence that colours everything. On an early plantation in 1730, food for black people was rarely generous and never accidental. Owners and overseers thought in terms of rations, cost, and usefulness. They wanted enough nourishment to keep labour going, though not enough comfort to suggest human consideration. Cornmeal was common in many colonies. So were small amounts of pork, salted fish, peas, beans, or whatever local supply made cheapest sense. The menu shifted by region, season, and the habits of the owner, but the larger patterns stayed insultingly familiar. Food was calculated from above and lived from below. You come near the cooking place and smell smoke, meal, grease, and greens. The scent is both comforting and frustrating, because it promises relief while reminding you how small the relief may be. A pot gives off a faint bubbling sound. A spoon scrapes the side. Steam carries the earthy smell of beans and the stronger note of pork fat if any is present. When food is meagre, smell becomes almost mischievous. It teases the body before satisfying it. The first mouthful matters. It is warm. It is plain. It settles the stomach like a truce. Cornmeal porridge, ash cake, hoe cake, or boiled meal may form the base of a meal depending on place and custom. The texture can be gritty or smooth, thick enough to chew or loose enough to sip. It fills space inside you even when it does not truly satisfy. Salted meat, when issued, might be tough, fibrous, and sharply flavoured from preservation. Greens offer softness, bitterness, or a little welcome freshness if they can be obtained. Beans give substance. Fish carries the taste of a river or coast. Even weak broth can feel almost luxurious when your body is tired enough. Yet plantation food is never only about what the owner provides. That would be too simple. And black life on early plantations was never simple. Across many plantations, enslaved people grew, gathered, trapped, fished, or bartered for extra food whenever the time, place, and risk allowed. Small garden plots could become quiet lifelines. A patch of peas, collards, yams, corn, pumpkins, or herbs might stand near the cabins, tucked into available ground and guarded with practical affection. These plots varied widely. Some were tolerated because they reduced the owner's provisioning burden. Some were encouraged in stingy fashion. Some existed in uncertain spaces between permission and necessity. Whatever the arrangement, the garden could mean the difference between hunger that weakens and hunger that merely nags. You kneel by a small patch of worked earth and notice how carefully it has been used. The soil is broken fine. Seeds are placed with knowledge, not hope alone. Weeds are pulled before they steal strength. Nothing here is casual. Gardens like these carried more than calories. They carried agricultural memory from Africa and from the Caribbean, adjusted to new climates and crueler circumstances. Black growers on plantations often knew more about coaxing life from difficult ground than the men who claimed the ownership of the land. There is something very sharp about that irony. A leaf crushed between the fingers gives off a green smell, fresh and peppery. An onion pulled from the earth brings up that rich, wet scent of roots. A handful of herbs can change a whole pot. Even one pepper, if available, can wake the tongue and make a plain meal feel intentional rather than purely desperate. Food is flavour, yes, but also dignity. Choosing how something tastes is a small form of authorship in a life where so little can be authored freely. You see a woman stirring a pot with the sort of concentration that deserves more applause than it will ever receive. She's making something from almost nothing. That's one of the oldest arts in hard places. A scrap of meat, a handful of greens, a pinch of meal, a bit of onion, some bean liquor, and somehow the result becomes supper. The smell deepens as the pot thickens. Smoke wraps around it. Heat presses against your face. Your stomach tightens in anticipation. Cooking itself is labour, and it often falls after other labour has already drained the body. Fires must be maintained, water carried, ingredients cleaned, utensils managed, children kept from danger, meals timed around work rhythms that ignore domestic effort entirely. The pot does not care that you're tired. The family does not stop being hungry because the daylight is fading. Plantation life excelled at assigning impossible tasks, then acting surprise when miracles were required. One curious detail that survives in oral histories and material records is how often food traditions endured through substitution. A recipe might lose one ingredient and gain another. A familiar method might be applied to an unfamiliar crop. Okra, rice, peas, greens, smoked fish, ground corn. All could be adapted into meals that preserved echoes of older foodways. Historians continue to debate which specific dishes can be traced most directly to African antecedents in the early 18th century, since cuisines travel in winding paths and written sources often arrive late or distorted. Still, the larger truth is clear enough. Black cooks shaped southern food long before white households claimed it as heritage. The body knows the difference between mere feeding and true eating. Mere feeding keeps you standing. True eating gives comfort. On most plantations, comfort had to be assembled in secret little pieces. A shared bowl passed carefully from hand to hand can feel warmer than the food alone should allow. A child getting the softer portion of a meal. An elder handed the best bit without ceremony. Someone saving a mouthful for another who came late from work. Such gestures build a moral world inside a brutal one. No overseer writes them down. No account book values them. Yet they are part of survival, because hunger is not only physical. There is also the hunger to be regarded, chosen, and cared for. Scarcity changes manners. People eat steadily, sometimes quickly, with an eye toward what remains. The spoon strikes the bowl with small efficient sounds. Steam fogs the face. Fingers become slick with grease or meal. The food may be too hot at first, then suddenly not hot enough. The cabin smells of smoke and supper together. One sharp, one soft. For a few minutes, conversation may loosen. Fatigue can make people quieter, but food often draws out small remarks. A dry joke, a complaint about the salt, a note about the garden, a tiny laugh at how thin the stew pretends not to be. Humour survives here too. Of course it does. Hardship without humour would make the world unbearable. So someone might squint into a pot and suggest that the cook has managed to feed an entire household with 3 beans and optimism. Someone else may answer that optimism was the richest ingredient available. The joke is gentle, but it carries knowledge. Meals are often stretched by wit as much as by water. Not every source of food is open or safe. Hunting, trapping, fishing, and foraging can supplement a diet, but each comes with risk, time, and uncertainty. A rabbit snared quietly, fish caught in a creek, wild greens gathered from a known patch, berries in season, nuts, roots, even a bird brought down when opportunity briefly appears. All of these can matter. They add protein, flavour, and precious variety. They also require knowledge of the local landscape that black people developed quickly and passed carefully among themselves. The wood smelled different from the plantation yard. Cooler, leafy, damp beneath the surface. You notice crushed pine, mud, water, and the faint sweetness of rot, where old leaves settle back into earth. Foraging teaches the nose as much as the eye, which plants are tender, which roots can be dug, which berries are safe, which patches belong to snakes, insects, or danger best avoided. Such knowledge is practical and intimate. It turns the surrounding world into more than scenery. It becomes a pantry, a map, and sometimes a fragile ally. Food can also be stolen back from the plantation in tiny acts of recovery. A little extra milk, a hidden egg, a piece of fruit, a handful of grain. Such acts were dangerous because property laws favoured the owner with almost theatrical devotion. Yet many enslaved people judged the morality of the matter differently, and with good reason. Taking nourishment from a system built on theft hardly feels like theft at all. It feels like arithmetic correcting itself. Children experience hunger in a way that is especially painful to imagine. Their bodies are growing. Their energy rises and falls suddenly. They may lick a spoon clean with fierce concentration. They may cry from hunger, then fall silent from fatigue. They may remember the taste of one good thing for weeks. Adults notice this and make decisions accordingly. The better portion drifts toward the child, the sweeter piece gets saved. A mother claims she's not hungry when she plainly is. An older sibling shrugs off a smaller share as if it were nothing. Such performances of sacrifice are quiet, constant, and deeply human. There is also ceremony, even when the circumstances are poor. A prayer over the pot, a word of thanks not to the owner, certainly not to him, but to God, to ancestors, to endurance itself. A blessing murmured in a language not everyone present understands. Hands pausing before the meal begins, heads bowed, eyes shut. The atmosphere shifts for a breath or two. Food enters a sacred frame, however briefly, and becomes more than ration. The taste of greens cooked slowly with fat has a depth that lingers on the tongue. Cornbread, when it is made firmer, breaks with a soft crumb and a smoky edge from the hearth. Beans carry their own earthiness. Rice, where available, feels lighter but no less precious. Molasses, if it appears dark and sweet, can transform an ordinary bite into something almost festive, not grand, not abundant, just sweet enough to remind the mouth that pleasure still exists. One fringe detail from plantation archaeology and account records is how often enslaved people used locally made pottery, gourds, shells, or improvised utensils when formal wares were scarce or reserved for the big house. A bowl does not have to be expensive to matter. A cup does not have to match another cup to hold comfort. There is something oddly touching about a mismatched eating world held together by necessity and care, yet no description of food should become cozy enough to blur the larger truth. Hunger was common. Malnutrition could weaken bodies already strained by labour. Food quality varied wildly. Theft of provisions by managers was not unknown. Illness could make cooking harder and eating harder still. For pregnant women, nursing mothers, elders, and the sick, these shortages could be especially punishing. The meal might soothe for an hour and fail the body by morning. Still, supper changes the atmosphere of the cabin. The room softens around the bowl and the fire. Bellies stop complaining quite so loudly. Shoulders release by a small degree. The sound of chewing, sipping, and scraping becomes a kind of evening music. Outside, insects begin their night chorus. Smoke drifts upward. A warm pot cools slowly on the hearth. You begin to see why food carries so much emotional weight. It is necessity, memory, labour, and fellowship packed into one daily event. It can mark generosity. It can reveal status. It can expose inequality with embarrassing clarity. It can also give a weary body just enough steadiness to continue. On rare occasions, a meal may feel abundant by local standards. A better catch from the water, a successful garden harvest, a feast day shaped by local custom, a bird trapped at the right moment, more meat in the stew than usual, a sweeter cake, a fuller bowl. Such moments matter because rarity sharpens appreciation. People notice. Voices rise a little. Children smile faster. Someone laughs with their whole chest. Then ordinary scarcity returns, just because of course it does. Plantation life has no intention of becoming generous overnight. But tonight, in the warm circle of firelight and food smell, you watch hands pass bowls with care. You hear the low murmur of tired voices. You taste smoke, salt, greens, meal, and whatever skill has managed to rescue from the day. The portion is not enough for justice. Nothing here is, yet within the limits of the bowl, people still make choices about love, duty, memory, and taste. That is the deeper story of food on an early plantation. It filled stomachs unevenly. It demanded ingenuity daily. It exposed the cruelty of the system. And in the hands of black cooks, gardeners, foragers, fishers, and mothers, it became one more place where life refused to surrender all its flavour. Love has to learn to live with interruption here. It cannot be soft in the way songs like to imagine. It cannot trust tomorrow. It cannot lean too heavily on promises, because promises on a plantation are fragile things, easily broken by sale, punishment, debt, or death. And still, people love. They do it stubbornly, tenderly, and with an intelligence sharpened by danger. You see it in the way two people stand close without drawing notice. You hear it in names spoken quietly at dusk. You feel it in the hush that settles when a child finally sleeps. Family on an early plantation in 1730 is both precious and exposed. Husbands and wives may live in the same cabin, in nearby cabins, or on different parts of the same estate. Some couples are allowed a measure of domestic stability because it suits the owner's interest. Others are kept apart by distance, labour demands, or deliberate interference. Marriage as recognised by the law is often denied to black people. Yet partnerships form all the same, blessed by community, by faith, by mutual devotion, or simply by shared survival. The law can refuse a bond. It cannot stop a bond from existing. The cabin at evening holds these bonds in plain sight. A woman smooths a child's hair while listening for footsteps outside. A man rubs his wrists after labour, then reaches for a sleeping infant with astonishing gentleness. An older girl quiets a younger brother without being asked. A grandmother, whether by blood or by earned place, tells a story in a low voice that steadies the whole room. Kinship here is elastic because it has to be. A plantation tears at family structure so often that people develop ways to widen it. A cousin becomes a brother in practice. An elder becomes auntie to half the row of cabins. A child, orphaned by sickness or sale, may be folded into another household without ceremony, because there is no time to waste on ceremony when care is required. This is not a sign that family means less. It means family has learned to survive attack. There is deep tenderness in these arrangements. There is deep grief too. One of slavery's ugliest truths is that separation is not a tragic accident at the edge of the system. It is built into the system itself. Enslaved people can be sold to settle debts, reward relatives, rearrange labour, or satisfy an owner's impulse. A child can be taken from a parent. A husband can be sent away. A mother can wake not knowing whether the cabin beside hers will still hold the same people next month. In some places and periods, internal sale would become even more extensive later. But the threat already exists here in 1730, shaping every attachment with a shadow. You notice how that shadow affects the smallest moments. A mother looks at her child with a kind of concentrated attention that feels almost fierce. She is not merely admiring the child, she is memorizing the shape of the cheek, the little scar near the brow, the exact texture of the curls at the neck. Love becomes archival under these conditions. People keep each other in memory as if memory itself were a refuge that cannot be raided. Children grow inside this uncertainty. They learn affection, discipline, language, and household habits from adults who are often exhausted and still somehow present. Plantation children are not sheltered from fear for long. They hear adult voices tighten. They sense when news has travelled through the cabins. They notice when someone does not return. Yet childhood does not vanish completely. It changes shape. It becomes watchful, practical, and quick to seize a playful minute when one appears. You see a small boy laughing as he chases a stick through the yard. For a breath. He is only a child. and someone calls his name with urgency, and the world resumes its weight. Parents carry the burden of teaching under pressure. They must show children how to behave in ways that may protect them, how to speak carefully, when to lower their eyes, when to keep still, whom to trust, what paths to avoid, how to recognize danger in a tone of voice before danger reaches a hand. This is not the education any parent would choose, but it is as vital as food. A child's survival may depend on reading white power correctly and quickly. At the same time, parents and elders pass on other lessons that belong to the family rather than the plantation. A proverb, a prayer, a naming tradition, a recipe, the right way to tie cloth around the head, the right herb for a stomach pain, a rhythm tapped softly on a knee, a memory of a river, a town, or a coast far away. Not every child will understand the full meaning at once. That is not the point. The point is transmission. A culture survives partly because someone decides a child should know one thing more before sleep. Mothers bear particular strain, though fathers and male kin suffer their own forms of vulnerability. Women may labour in the fields or the house while pregnant. They may nurse after long work days. They may tend the sick while ill themselves. They may endure the constant fear that their children are visible to the plantation first as future labour. There is a cold logic in slavery that counts a child's body before the child has even grown into it. To live beside that logic and still cradle, sing to, and comfort a baby is a kind of courage too ordinary to be praised enough. The sound of caregiving fills the cabin in subtle ways. A hum with no full tune, a bowl gently set down so as not to wake the sleeping child, the rustle of cloth, the click of a tongue to soothe fussing, the whisper that says you are here, I am here, stay calm. These are soft sounds, but they hold the room together. Fathers, husbands, brothers, and male partners are often forced to perform strength in one realm and helplessness in another. A man may chop wood, carry loads, mend fences, or endure field labour with visible endurance, yet have almost no legal power to secure the safety of his partner or child. That contradiction can bruise the spirit. Still, affection appears in practical forms, a repaired stool, a tucked blanket, a saved portion of food, a child carried asleep from one spot to another without waking. Love here is often less about speeches and more about quiet acts that say I noticed what you needed. There is romance too, though it grows in hard soil. Courtship on a plantation is limited by labour schedules, distance, surveillance, and the owner's authority. Yet people still flirt, still choose, still hope. A shared look at the water bucket, a joke traded while returning from work, a meeting arranged in the slimmest margin of evening, new cloth tied carefully because someone might see it, hair braided with extra attention, a young man borrowing courage from the dark, a young woman pretending not to notice him immediately, because dignity deserves its own little stage. These moments matter, because they remind you that enslaved people are not merely sufferers in a system. They are whole persons with taste, desire, embarrassment, standards, and charm. Oppression tries to flatten personality. Personality keeps appearing anyway. Wonderfully inconvenient and impossible to file away neatly, some unions are recognized by the community in ways more meaningful than law. People gather quietly, hands are joined, blessings are spoken. A broom may be used in some traditions later and in some places, though customs vary and the historical evidence is not always straightforward. Historians still debate how widespread particular marriage rituals were in the early 18th century, because plantation records rarely care to describe black ceremony accurately, and later memory can blend times and places. What is certain is that enslaved couples created forms of commitment that drew authority from one another, and from their community when the state offered none. Then there is loss. Loss sits at the edge of every family scene. A woman waits for news from a nearby plantation where her partner has been hired out. A child asks after someone who is not coming back. A name is spoken more rarely because saying it aloud hurts. An empty place near the fire becomes part of the room's arrangement. Grief under slavery is complicated by the fact that mourning itself may not be granted proper time. Work continues. Orders continue. The field does not pause because the heart has cracked. You feel this cruelty most clearly when ordinary family habits continue after disruption. A mother reaches for a bowl meant for a child now gone. A man glances toward the door, expecting a face that no longer appears there. A younger sibling saves a comment for someone who has been sold away. Then remembers, the body takes longer than the mind to learn absence. Sometimes much longer, and still, families fight against erasure with remarkable discipline. They remember kin across distance. They pass down names. They tell children who belong to whom, who came from what place, who had a laugh like thunder, who could mend anything made of wood, who sang low, who walked fast, who loved pepper in every dish. The details may seem small. They are not small. Details are what rescue people from becoming statistics in someone else's ledger. There is also discipline within families, because affection does not remove the need for order. Children are corrected, teenagers are warned, manners are taught, responsibilities distributed, someone must fetch, someone must sweep, someone must watch the baby, someone must stop teasing before the teasing turns foolish. Family life has ordinary irritations, even under extraordinary oppression. That is part of what makes it human. People still get annoyed. People still roll their eyes. People still speak sharply and regret it later. Not every moment is noble. Thank heaven for that. Constant nobility would be exhausting. A cabin at night can hold a full range of feeling in very little space. A child giggles at the wrong moment. An elder hushes him. A couple exchanges a look over a sleeping body. Someone sighs from tiredness. Someone murmurs a prayer for protection. A baby roots sleepily for milk. A hand finds another hand in the dark. Outside, insects sing their endless chorus while the room warms with breath. Sometimes stories are told before sleep. They may teach caution, explain a strange event, make a child laugh, or preserve a thread of memory from another generation. Stories are not luxuries here. They are containers. They hold wisdom, warning, identity, and occasionally the only safe version of truth that can be spoken in public hearing. A clever animal, a foolish master, a trickster figure, a lost traveller, an ancestor with uncanny skill. All of these can live in the same spoken world. Listeners learn more than one lesson at a time. There are darker family fears too. Illness can spread quickly in crowded quarters. Childbirth is dangerous. A fever can rise by nightfall and alter a household by dawn. The sick are tended with all available care, herbal knowledge, prayer, cool cloths, whispered comfort. But resources are limited and certainty is a luxury no one has. Midwives and healers become essential figures in this world, respected not because titles are given to them by the state, but because bodies and families depend on them. One overlooked truth of plantation life is how often emotional survival rests on repetition. The same lullaby, the same blessing, the same way of wrapping a baby, the same phrase spoken at bedtime. Repetition says the world is unstable, but this part remains. That is no small gift to a child, or to an adult who secretly needs the reassurance too. When sleep finally begins to settle over the cabin, bodies shift into familiar places. The air smells of smoke, skin, old cloth, and fading supper. Breath deepens. A child turns in sleep and presses close to warmth. Someone covers another's shoulder without waking them. The room is crowded, imperfect, and vulnerable to every threat beyond its walls. Yet inside it, people keep practicing the ordinary devotions of family life. That may be the most important thing to understand. Slavery tried to turn people into labouring units. Families answered by insisting on relationship. Slavery threatened constant separation. Families answered by memorising one another. Slavery denied legal bonds. Families answered with lived bonds that law could neither create nor fully destroy. And in the dark, when names are whispered softly enough to belong only to those who love them, you can hear the deeper truth beneath the plantation's noise. Black family life in 1730 is fragile. Yes. Endangered. Yes. Grief marked. Certainly. But it is also disciplined, tender, adaptive, and fiercely real. That reality is what the system fears most, because once people belong to one another in love, they are already more than property. When the day's noise begins to lower, another kind of a life starts to rise. It is quieter, it is less visible, it carries things the plantation cannot fully measure. You notice it first in the way voices change after labour. Orders fall away. The sharp tone of command loses its grip. In its place comes softer sounds, low conversation, a hum near the fire, a murmur over a child, a few words spoken with care rather than urgency. The air itself seems to relax, though only slightly. Smoke curls upward in the dimness. Night insects begin their patient music outside. Somewhere in the dark, water moves with a sound like steady breathing. Faith lives easily in such hours, not because life is easy, but because hardship creates questions too large for silence alone. On early plantations in 1730, Black Americans and newly arrived Africans carried religious worlds that did not begin in the colonies. Some had been raised with Islamic traditions, though the records often blur or erase that reality. Some came with spiritual systems rooted in West or Central African cosmologies, where ancestors, sacred forces, healing practices, ritual objects, and community ceremonies shaped daily understanding. Some encountered Protestant Christianity through white colonists who preached obedience far more eagerly than justice. In many cabins and yards, these influences met, overlapped, or stood beside one another in uneasy but creative company. That mixture matters. It means faith here is not neat. It is layered, it is adapted, it is alive. You stand near a small fire and watch the glow move across people's faces. Light catches the curve of a cheek, the edge of a head wrap, the shine of tired eyes. A woman closes her hands together and bows her head. A man looks upward before speaking. Not dramatically. Just for a moment, as if measuring his thoughts against the darkness above. A child copies the gesture without fully knowing why. This is how belief often travels, not in grand declarations, in repeated motions, in tones of voice, in habits of reverence learned close to the body. Prayer can be spoken aloud, whispered, sung, or carried only in thought. Some prayers ask plainly for protection, health, relief from pain, or safety for loved ones. Some are prayers of thanks for survival through one more day. Some stretch beyond the immediate cabin and ask for justice, deliverance, or reunion. Though those hopes may be framed in careful language when ears cannot be trusted, a prayer does not have to be long to hold a whole world inside it. The atmosphere changes when several people pray together. The room gathers itself. Breathing slows, children become still, or are hushed into stillness. The sound of night beyond the walls seems to press closer. Frogs, insects, leaves moving in the dark. Smoke carries the smell of pine and ash. Warmth rests against your shins. Someone's voice begins low and steady, and the words move through the cabin like hands smoothing rough cloth. Christianity on early plantations was often introduced in ways shaped by white control. Owners and ministers might emphasize passages about servants obeying masters, as if the Bible had been written mainly to flatter planters. It is an embarrassing use of scripture, though plantation society displayed little embarrassment about it. At the same time, many black people heard other possibilities in the Christian message: deliverance, judgment, the dignity of the soul, the downfall of the mighty, the idea that suffering was seen by God even when ignored by men. Such themes could carry deep force, especially when lived reality offered so little earthly fairness. Not everyone accepted Christian teaching in the same way, and not all plantations pushed conversion with equal energy in 1730. In some colonies, owners worried that baptism might complicate the legal status of enslaved people. Though laws generally evolved to make clear that Christian status did not mean freedom, that ugly clarification tells you quite a lot about colonial priorities. Heaven? Perhaps. Equality? Absolutely not. Historians still disagree about the speed and extent of Christianization among enslaved Africans in the early 18th century, because evidence varies by region, and much private practice left no formal record. What is clear is that black spiritual life was never simply passive reception. People interpreted, reshaped, filtered, and combined what they encountered. You hear this in the singing, "It may begin with one voice, and then gather others." The melody can be simple, repeated enough for everyone to follow. It can sway rather than march. It can hold a line a little longer than expected, then settle back. Some songs are mournful, some are steadying, some almost smile despite themselves. The sound in a small room is intimate, close enough that you can hear the texture of each person's fatigue inside it. A rough voice, a clear voice, a child joining late, a hum beneath the words, nothing polished, everything felt. Song is memory in motion. It carries language, rhythm, theology, and comfort all at once. It reaches where plain speech cannot. African musical traditions did not disappear upon arrival in the colonies. Rhythmic patterns, call and response forms, tonal habits, body movement, and the social use of song all persisted in transformed ways. Some practices had to be muted because of surveillance or changing circumstance. Some found room inside Christian forms. Some travelled through lullabies, work songs, laments, or healing rituals rather than what a white observer would recognise as formal worship. A plantation owner might hear noise. A community could hear continuity. In some cabins, spiritual protection may involve more than prayer in the Christian sense. A bundle tucked near a sleeping area, certain roots placed carefully, water set in a particular way, marks made discreetly, words spoken over a person who is ill, frightened, or newly born. White colonists often dismiss such acts as superstition, which is a useful reminder that the powerful are frequently poor interpreters of other people's intelligence. What looked to them like foolish custom could carry deep symbolic logic, inherited knowledge, or an understanding of healing that combined physical and spiritual care. You watch an elder tend to a child with a feverish forehead. A cloth is dipped in cool water and laid gently across the skin. A few leaves or roots are crushed, releasing a bitter green smell. The elder murmurs while working, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a blessing, perhaps something that belongs to a spiritual vocabulary not written in plantation documents. The child calms. The room watches. In this moment, healing and faith are not separate departments. They belong to the same lived world. That blending appears again in burial and mourning customs, though practices differ widely. Death on or near a plantation was never rare, and communities developed ways to grieve that drew from African tradition, Christian language, and local necessity. A song at a bedside, careful washing of the body, a watch through the night if possible, a prayer over the grave, the placement of an object with the dead, the naming of the person in stories afterward so that memory does not close over too quickly. Not every custom survived unchanged. Not every community had the same resources or freedoms, but reverence travelled wherever people could carry it. Children absorb all of this while sitting quietly beside adults, half listening and wholly learning. They see when heads bow. They hear which names are spoken with awe. They learn that some moments require stillness, that some songs belong to sorrow, that some words are not casual words. A child may ask whether God can see through walls, and the adults might answer yes with striking confidence. In a world of constant surveillance from below, divine sight from above can feel either comforting or alarming, usually both. There is also the question of ancestors. In many African-descended spiritual traditions, the dead are not imagined as entirely absent. They remain morally present, remembered, consulted, respected, and in some sense near. On early plantations, such understandings could persist openly, quietly, or in altered form depending on the community and the pressure around it. A grandmother may speak of someone gone as if that person still listens. A parent may tell a child to behave in a way that honours those who came before. A name may be repeated for a newborn, linking life to life. Memory becomes sacred duty. The night air outside the cabin feels cooler now. It carries damp grass, wood smoke, and the faint mineral smell of nearby water. If people gather outdoors for a time, their voices remain low, but the sky above them offers a kind of relief. Stars spread overhead with careless abundance. The plantation likes boundaries of fences, walls, ledgers, categories. The sky ignores all of that. No wonder people look up when they pray. Sometimes faith becomes a form of coded speech. Biblical stories can be discussed in ways that touch present life without naming it too directly. Pharaoh and bondage do not need much explanation. Wilderness and promised land do not arrive empty either. At the same time, not every spiritual gathering is politically explicit. Sometimes people simply need comfort, forgiveness, or strength for ordinary suffering. To reduce all black religion under slavery to resistance alone would be too narrow. Human beings pray for many reasons. They seek meaning, mercy, healing, order, and peace, even in the smallest matters. One fringe detail scholars have noted is that some African linguistic patterns and ritual forms may have survived in prayer cadence long after specific words were lost or transformed. The body remembers what the page forgets. Rhythm can outlive vocabulary. Gesture can survive translation. This is one reason sound matters so much in spiritual life. A faith tradition does not live only in doctrine. It lives in timing, breath, emphasis, and the shape of collective response. You hear a prayer leader pause at the end of a line. Another voice answers softly, then another. The exchange is gentle, almost like weaving. No one rushes. The words settle into the room. Outside the formal language of prayer, faith also appears in proverbs, warnings, and everyday interpretation. A dream may be discussed seriously at breakfast. An unusual animal cry may invite comment. A narrow escape from injury may be called grace. A run of bad luck may lead people to wonder what force has been disturbed. Such interpretations are not signs of simple credulity. They reflect a worldview in which the visible world is not all that matters. Many societies have thought exactly that. They simply prefer to call their own version wisdom and everyone else's superstition. There can be tension too. One person may lean more toward Christian teaching, another may trust older healing knowledge more deeply, a third may keep private beliefs entirely to themselves. Communities are not uniform. People disagree. They experiment. They worry. They choose what to speak and what to keep hidden. Faith under pressure is rarely tidy. It bends, gathers, and sometimes contradicts itself without losing sincerity. What remains constant is the need for meaning. The plantation explains life in terms of labour and property. Spiritual life insists that labour is not the whole story. The plantation counts bodies. Faith asks what cannot be counted. The plantation names rank. Prayer names worth. By the time the fire burns lower, the room has changed. The same walls stand around you. The same rough floor presses beneath bare feet. The same dangers wait outside in the dark and return with the next daylight. Yet the atmosphere holds a different weight now, something steadier, less frantic, more inward. A child sleeps more easily after a song. An adult sits with straighter shoulders after prayer. An elder's face softens as the final words fade. No one has escaped. Nothing has become fair. But the soul has been addressed, and that matters. As the night deepens, someone whispers a final blessing over those in the room. Protection for the sleepers. Health for the sick. Strength for the weak. Mercy for the grieving. justice for the unseen future. Perhaps, though it may not be spoken exactly that way. The cabin falls quieter. Breath slows. Outside, the darkness stretches across the plantation, but inside, belief lingers like warmth in the embers. This is the spiritual life of black Americans on early plantations in 1730. Part inheritance, part adaptation, part endurance, part hope. It moves through prayer, song, healing, memory, and reverence with a force that no ledger can hold. And in that force, the people claim something the plantation can threaten but never own. The inner life, the sacred life, the life that looks beyond the field, beyond the cabin, beyond the master's reach, and says with calm certainty that human beings were made for more than this. Power on the plantation does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it waits, sometimes it stands very still until everyone else feels the need to move carefully around it. That is what control feels like here. Not only punishment when it lands, but the thick expectation of punishment before it lands. It hangs in the air like humidity before a storm. You can smell wood smoke, damp soil, and evening sweat. Yet beneath all of it sits another odour that no nose can quite name. Fear has an atmosphere. On an early plantation in 1730, people live inside it daily. Rules shape nearly every motion. Who may walk where? Who may carry what? Who may speak first? Who may visit whom? Who may leave the plantation boundary? Who must return by dark? Some of these rules are written in colonial law. Some live in plantation custom. Some change from owner to owner depending on mood, region, and local practice. But the larger design is always the same. Black movement must be observed, black gathering must be limited, black independence must be discouraged before it even begins to form. You feel this most clearly when you imagine taking a road. A road should simply be a road. Packed dirt, wheel ruts, hoof prints, dust in dry weather, mud in wet weather. Yet for an enslaved person it becomes a question. Why are you on it? Who sent you? Can you prove it? A trip to another plantation, a mill, a river landing, or a nearby settlement may require permission, spoken or written, depending on the colony and the local regime. Even when permission exists, danger remains. A black person moving through space alone draws notice because the system is designed to treat ordinary movement as suspicious. So walking itself becomes skilled work. You learn when to keep your eyes low and when to meet a gaze briefly without challenge. You learn the difference between a patrol and a neighbour. You learn which dogs bark first. You learn which paths offer cover and which expose you too early. That knowledge is not trivial. It is the difference between arrival and arrest, between a scolding and a beating, between a warning and something worse. Night magnifies all of this. Darkness softens the edges of the fields and cabins, but it sharpens anxiety. Footsteps carry farther after sunset. A lantern moving at a distance can make a whole cabin fall quiet. Patrols, watches, local militias, or plantation men charged with enforcing order may pass through roads and crossings looking for runaways, unauthorized gatherings, or anything that smells to them like disorder. The very word disorder does a great deal of dishonest work in such a society. It can mean resistance. It can mean exhaustion. It can mean grief. It can mean two people talking too long after dark. The sound of boots on packed earth has its own message. So does the rattle of tack from a horse. So does the sudden barking of a dog that recognizes a stranger. Inside the cabin, these sounds change posture. Backs straighten. Voices lower. Children are hushed with a quick finger to the lips. A hand stills over a bowl. The whole room listens. Control is effective not only because of what armed men can do, but because entire communities must pause to measure whether armed men are near. Punishment, when it comes, is meant to teach more people than the one receiving it. That is one reason it is often public or at least well known afterward. A whipping can bruise one body and intimidate 50. Confinement, forced labour under harsher conditions, sale, branding in some times and places, chains, stocks, iron collars, all become part of the plantation's language of command. It is a blunt language, though white authorities often pretend it is rational discipline. There is nothing especially rational about a system that answers human need with spectacle. You notice how people talk around punishment rather than through it, a pause in conversation when a name arises, a warning to a child not to ask too much, a sentence that begins with "do not let them catch you," a face turned away because memory is already vivid enough. Silence itself becomes one of the plantation's tools, but it also becomes one of the enslaved community's shields. Not every story can be told loudly. Not every wound can be explained in front of everyone. Some truths are carried in glances, in lowered tones, in the way a person moves after an injury that nobody names. Control also works through time. The day begins when ordered. The work stops when ordered. Food is given according to someone else's schedule. Sleep is interrupted by demands. Visits are shortened. Gatherings are watched. Even joy must be fitted into whatever cracks remain. A person may feel tired in the body, but there is another fatigue too, the fatigue of never owning your own hours. That can wear the spirit down in ways bruises do not show. Women face additional dangers inside this structure. A world ruled by ownership and racial power is also one where black women are exposed to sexual coercion, harassment, and assault with almost no legal protection. Plantation records often blur or deny this reality, but silence in records does not equal safety in life. Women develop their own forms of warning, vigilance, and mutual protection where possible. A look exchanged across a yard, a reason to stay near others, a child kept close, a door watched carefully. This kind of knowledge circulates because it must. Men, too, are controlled not only through labour and threat of physical punishment, but through humiliation, being forced to stand still under insult, being ordered by boys younger than you, being denied the right to protect your family openly, being watched for anger as if anger itself were a crime. A plantation depends on reducing personhood while demanding perfect usefulness. That contradiction would be absurd if it were not so cruel. And then there are the rules no one bothers to write down. The wrong tone can be punished. The wrong delay can be noticed. The wrong expression can be interpreted as insolence. The wrong amount of confidence can look dangerous. This is why reading power becomes a daily art. You learn to notice the set of an overseer's shoulders, the dryness in an owner's voice, the silence before a command, the unusual stillness of the yard. People often speak of survival under slavery as though it were only physical endurance. It is also social intelligence of the highest order. Knowing how to pass through a volatile world with your dignity bruised but intact requires astonishing perception. One strange little truth of systems built on dominance is that they often reveal insecurity at every turn. Why so many rules? Why so much surveillance? Why such alarm over meetings, songs, visits, or movement? Because power knows it is outnumbered in moral legitimacy, even when it is armed. The plantation fears black gathering because gathering creates relationship. It fears movement because movement creates options. It fears literacy, information, or independent trade because each opens a small window in a locked house. The system performs certainty while trembling beneath it. That trembling sometimes shows in overreaction. A rumour passes through the county. Suddenly watches are stricter. Questions become sharper. Permission is harder to get. White men gather to reassure one another that order is under control, which is usually a sign that they do not quite believe it. Black people feel the change immediately. More eyes on the road, more suspicion in the yard, more tension in every exchange. Control extends into clothing and possessions too. A hat, a knife, a blanket, a horse, a scrap of paper, a tool carried at the wrong time. All can become suspicious objects depending on who is looking and why. A person learns what can be carried openly and what must be hidden. Even harmless items take on a political quality in a world where ownership has been arranged so unevenly. An ordinary thing becomes dangerous when it suggests autonomy. The body itself is monitored for signs. Are you tired? Are you limping? Are you pregnant? Are you ill? Are you old enough to work harder? Are you strong enough to sell at a better price? Plantation Authority studies the black body constantly while refusing to recognise the black self fully at all. It is a grotesque kind of attention, intimate without care, detailed without compassion, and yet, even within this net of rules, people preserve inner space. That may be the point worth holding on to. A person can obey an order outwardly while rejecting its justice inwardly. A person can bow the head and still keep judgment alive behind the eyes. A person can measure risk, choose silence, and remain morally unconvinced. This inward refusal does not erase danger. It does not make chains imaginary. But it does matter because the plantation wants more than labour. It wants consent to the lie that this arrangement is natural. Black people deny that lie every time they understand clearly what is being done to them. Children are raised inside this world of warning. They learn which roads belong to trouble, which white men are unpredictable, which times of day are safest for small errands, how quickly they must answer when called, and when to disappear behind an elder's skirt or shoulder. Such education is sobering. A child who learns it too well may look older than his years. A child who learns it too slowly may not be allowed the luxury of slowness again. Some of the harshest control comes not in dramatic punishment, but in the constant narrowing of possibility. You may not visit freely. You may not choose work. You may not marry with security. You may not rest when needed. You may not defend yourself as lawfully as a white person. You may not speak truth safely in many settings. The pressure of these restrictions can make the whole plantation feel smaller than its acres. Even religion, which offers comfort, can be policed. Gatherings may be watched. Prayers may be tolerated only when they sound obedient enough. Songs may be judged for hidden meanings. White authorities often want the soothing parts of faith without the liberating parts. Human beings, of course, are not so easy to edit. Meaning slips through. There is another layer to control that rarely appears in neat plantation descriptions. Shame. A person may be punished in ways meant not only to hurt, but to reduce them before others. Public accusation, forced posture, mocking words, commands designed to strip away composure. Such acts try to train the soul into compliance through embarrassment. Yet communities often answer by quietly restoring one another afterward. A wound washed, a joke offered gently, a seat made near the fire, a silence that protects rather than isolates. Cruelty intends to degrade. Community often steps in to say, no, not completely. As evening deepens, the plantation seems to settle, but control never fully sleeps. The big house still glows. Dogs still patrol their own territory with ears alert. A passing rider can still bring alarm. Somewhere. An owner may be counting tools, workers, or imagined threats. Somewhere. A person in the cabins is deciding whether it is worth the risk to visit a loved one a short distance away, to share news, to borrow medicine, to warn someone of a danger moving through the county. Every such decision is shaped by the rules. Every such decision also tests them. What makes this world especially exhausting is that the rules are never only about order. They're about reminding black people, again and again, that their lives are being handled by others. Control must repeat itself because injustice is unstable. It needs daily rehearsal. The pass, the patrol, the order, the threat, the punishment, the watchful stare, all repeat the same ugly lesson. You are not your own, but inside the cabins, on the roads, in the fields, and in the silence after someone's heavy footsteps pass, another lesson is quietly preserved. You're still a thinking person. You're still capable of judgment. You still know the difference between authority and cruelty, between order and domination, between law and justice. That knowledge is dangerous to the plantation, because it means the system has mastered bodies imperfectly and minds not at all. So the rules continue. The violence remains close. The patrols move through the dark. The pass may be demanded, the threat may be spoken, yet beneath all that pressure, black life keeps generating caution without surrendering understanding. People learn how to bend, calculate, lower the voice, shorten the visit, hide the object, read the mood, and survive the hour. It is an exhausting brilliance, forged under conditions no one should have to endure. And when the night air cools your skin while distant footsteps fade, you understand the deepest truth of plantation control. It is vast, yes. It is brutal, yes. But it is never effortless. It must be enforced again tomorrow because tonight, even after all the rules, the people in the cabin still possess thoughts, loyalties, judgments, and private certainties beyond its reach. That is why power keeps pacing outside the door, because it knows the door is not the whole person. Not every kind of work on the plantation looks the same. Some labour happens in the open field, where the sun exposes every motion and every ache. Other labour takes place closer to the house, closer to the workshops, closer to the places where skill becomes impossible to ignore. The plantation still claims the person performing it, still profits from the knowledge, still pretends that talent belongs naturally to ownership. But skill changes the atmosphere around a body. It makes that body necessary in a different way. You notice it first in the yard behind the larger house. There is movement here unlike the movement of the fields, less row and rhythm, more purpose in many directions at once. A cook crosses with practiced speed, balancing heat, timing, and the fragile moods of those she feeds. A carpenter studies a joint before fitting wood to wood. A blacksmith works near the forge where metal glows orange and sends sharp sparks into the dim air. A driver speaks to workers in one tone and to the overseer in another, carrying strain from both directions. A midwife listens with patient attention to another woman's breathing. None of this work is free. None of it is easy. Yet each role creates a narrow, complicated space between usefulness and power. The plantation values skill because skill protects profit. That does not mean it respects the person. It means it needs them badly enough to notice. A cook may begin before the rest of the household has opened its eyes fully. The kitchen smells of ash, hot iron, damp wood, onions, animal fat, and bread beginning to rise. Fire must be coaxed, not merely lit. Water must be heated. Pots must be managed so that one thing does not burn while another remains underdone. A kitchen can roar like a furnace by midday, especially in warm weather. Heat presses against the cheeks. Grease pops. Steam dampens the skin. The floor grows slick in places. A cook must remember portions, preferences, timings, and substitutions all at once, while probably hearing more household conversation than anyone intended her to hear. That last detail matters. The kitchen is a workplace, but it is also a listening post. News passes through it with the bread, an argument in the big house, a visitor expected by afternoon, a debt discussed at table, a letter received from town, a rumour about prices, patrols, sickness, or travel. A skilled cook hears the room while appearing not to hear it. That kind of listening can become its own form of leverage. Not open power, certainly not safety, but knowledge. And knowledge on a plantation is never trivial. Then there is the blacksmith, whose world sounds different from every other part of the estate. Hammer on iron, bellows breathing life into the fire, tongs scraping, metal ringing out in bright, hard notes that travel farther than conversation. The forge smells of heat itself, though if heat had a scent it would be mixed with coal smoke, singed leather, sweat, and the mineral tang of worked iron. A blacksmith makes nails, hinges, hooks, tools, chains, repairs wagon parts, shapes fittings, and keeps the plantation functioning in 100 plain ways. No one at the big house bothers to praise for long. When the hammer falls correctly, the whole place depends on it. A carpenter lives in another rhythm. Saw, plane, measures, lift, fit. The scent here is cleaner, though still sharp. Fresh-cut wood carries sweetness. Pine smells different from oak. Shavings curl to the floor in pale ribbons. A practiced hand can judge a board by grain, weight, and sound. A skilled carpenter may repair cabins, build fences, mend carts, shape storage chests, fashion stools, or work on parts of the larger house itself. Imagine the absurdity. A man denied legal ownership helping build the comfort of those who claim to own him. Plantation life is never short on contradiction. Coopers, someone says too, hold quiet importance. Barrels are not glamorous, but they carry tobacco, grain, salted goods, and other products essential to trade. A poor barrel leaks wealth, a tight barrel preserves it. So a cooper's eye for staves, hoops, fit, and seal can matter greatly, especially on plantations linked closely to commercial markets. You may never hear anyone boast at dinner about the poetry of barrel making, but let a shipment spoil and suddenly everyone rediscovers respect for craftsmanship. Drivers occupy one of the most difficult positions of all. The title can sound almost ordinary to outside ears, but the role is loaded with pressure. A driver may be an enslaved man placed in charge of organising labour, relaying orders, and helping maintain pace among other enslaved workers. He stands in a narrow, painful gap, expected to answer upward to white authority while remaining visible to the people forced to work beside him. Some drivers may gain small privileges, better clothing, extra food, more mobility, perhaps a little plot of land or access to information. Yet such advantages sit beside moral strain, suspicion, resentment, and danger. A driver who softens too much may be punished. A driver who hardens too much may wound his own community. Few positions better capture how slavery tries to make one oppressed person carry a portion of the machinery. You can see that burden in posture. A driver listens twice before speaking. He keeps his face measured. He rarely relaxes all the way. Even in stillness, he appears to be calculating. Such a role demands judgment, because each day brings choices about pace, tone, timing, and what can be passed along as warning rather than command. In the tiniest adjustments, a person may sometimes reduce harm, or fail to, or be forced to act against every private instinct. Plantation hierarchies are expert at creating these cruelly compromised spaces. Women with healing knowledge carry another kind of authority, one less formal and often more intimate. A midwife, nurse, or healer enters moments when the body can no longer hide its needs. Fever does not care about rank. Childbirth does not pause for plantation convenience. A cut festers, a child coughs through the night, an elder's joints swell. In such times, the person with knowledge of herbs, poultices, birthing positions, soothing teas, cooling cloths, or simple reassurance becomes central. The cabin may fill with the smells of crushed leaves, warm water, smoke, vinegar, or rendered fat used in remedies. The healer's hands move with confidence, even when outcomes remain uncertain. This knowledge often comes through women, passed quietly, remembered carefully, adjusted to local plants and conditions, respected by those who have seen it work. The white household may rely on such women more than it admits. An enslaved midwife might deliver black babies, tend white infants, calm anxious mothers, or serve as the first line of practical medical care on a plantation where the doctor arrives late, charges dearly, or knows less than he pretends. There is dark irony here too. The system denies black women full personhood while depending on their competence at the edge of life itself. Seamstresses and laundresses live in another domain of relentless skill. Cloth tears, shirts wear through, bedding frays. Garments for the big house must be washed, dried, mended, and kept in presentable order no matter the season. Soap stings the hands, water sloshes heavy in buckets, wet linen drags at the arms, needles flash in low light, fingers toughen, then crack. A seamstress studies wear patterns the way a field hand studies weather. She knows where fabric fails first, where patches will hold, which thread can survive hard use, and how to make clothing last 1 month longer than it should. Cleverness thrives in such work. A hidden scrap saved, a better patch placed where no one notices, a ribbon of cloth transformed into something useful, a child dressed warmer because an older garment was cut down skillfully. This is not dramatic power, but it is real influence over comfort, dignity, and daily endurance. Boatmen, ferrymen, and carters may also occupy distinct positions, especially on plantations tied to rivers, creeks, or ports. These men move goods, messages, and sometimes people. They know currents, roads, bridge conditions, wagon balance, weather signs, and the habits of men who wait at landings. Mobility brings risk and opportunity together. Someone who travels beyond the immediate plantation sees more, hears more, and may become a quiet channel through which news moves. The smell of tar, river mud, wet rope, horse sweat, and cargo all clings to such work. So does possibility. Even domestic servants nearest the big house may develop a different kind of skill, not only in labour, but in reading the emotional weather of white families. A maid, valet, nurse, or butler must judge when a room is tense, when a mistress is on the edge of anger, when a guest must be served first, when a child can be soothed quietly before causing offence. This is emotional labour in the sharpest sense. To survive, you must anticipate another person's moods before they fully arrive. That is a tiring art, but an art all the same. Skill does not erase vulnerability. That is important. A talented cook can still be sold. A gifted carpenter can still be whipped. A trusted midwife can still be denied rest. A driver can still be crushed between demands. A blacksmith can still be treated as property while making the hardware of someone else's freedom. The plantation is perfectly capable of valuing what a person can do while despising who that person is. In fact, that contradiction sits near the centre of slavery's logic, yet skill can create slivers of room. A little more movement, a better chance to speak to others, access to tools, knowledge of schedules, time spent away from the harshest field labour, at least sometimes, contact with markets, visitors, or neighbouring estates, the ability to trade a service quietly, the chance to make or mend something for one's own household after the official work is done. None of this should be exaggerated into freedom, but neither should it be dismissed. Narrow space is still space when life has been built to deny all of it. One curious detail of plantation life is how often the most essential work remained the least celebrated. White owners like to imagine themselves as masters of grand agricultural enterprises, but estates depended constantly on black expertise that was practical, specialised, and local. Who knows which herb cools a fever? Who can set a wheel back in line? Who can repair the kettle handle? Who can calm a labouring mother? Who can sharpen the blade properly? Who can judge whether flour has turned? Who can prepare meat so it lasts? Who can read the river after heavy rain? Strip away those people and the plantation begins to wobble embarrassingly fast. Historians still argue over how much social standing skilled enslaved workers could build within plantation communities, because evidence shifts by region and by occupation. Some gained respect, influence, or modest privileges. Some became targets of envy or closer white control. Some held both at once. Human societies are never tidy enough to sort every role neatly. But it is clear that craft, healing, domestic expertise, and labour management shaped daily life more deeply than plantation ledgers usually admit. You see that truth in the way people seek out certain persons after work. The woman known for good remedies, the man who can repair a stool leg, the cook who understands how to stretch poor supplies, the seamstress with the steadiest hand, the elder who knows how to set a poultice or settle a quarrel. People gather around competence because competence offers relief. It solves immediate problems, it saves labour, it prevents disaster. It can also create reputation, and reputation is one of the few currencies the enslaved community can develop from within. There is pride here too, quiet pride, sometimes hidden, sometimes impossible to hide, A blacksmith may look at a clean-finished hinge and know it is good work. A cook may taste a stew and know she rescued it. A midwife may hear a newborn cry and feel the fierce calm of a task completed. A carpenter may run a hand over a smooth-planed board and recognise his own excellence. That inward satisfaction matters because slavery tries to sever labour from self-respect. Skilled work can tie them back together, if only for a moment. I made this. I fixed this. I knew what to do. The plantation may claim the result, but the craft still passes through the worker's own mind and hands. That fact cannot be completely stolen. As evening draws down, the yard begins to cool. The forge dims. Kitchen heat lingers in the bricks. Sawdust settles. Needles are set aside. Water in a bucket reflects the last week light. People who have carried these roles through the day step back into the common tiredness of plantation life. Sore feet, stiff shoulders, smoke in the hair, fatigue behind the eyes. Their labour was different in form, but not outside the system's reach. Still, something remains, a measure of usefulness that cannot be denied, a reputation built among the cabins, a hidden line of influence through service, repair, healing, or information, a narrow place where intelligence shows itself plainly, and in that place, the plantation reveals something it would rather conceal. Black Americans in 1730 were never merely hands in the field. Though the field tried hard enough to define them, they were artisans, cooks, nurses, midwives, smiths, carpenters, drivers, seamstresses, and practical experts of every kind. Their skill kept the estate alive while their humanity kept one another going. The owner saw value, the community saw capability, and often, those were not the same thing at all. Resistance does not always arrive with a dramatic entrance. Sometimes it looks like a pause, sometimes it sounds like a whisper. Sometimes it hides inside an ordinary day so well that the plantation notices only the result, not the decision behind it. That is one of the most important truths to understand. On an early plantation in 1730, black resistance is not limited to open revolt or flight, though both remain part of the larger story. Resistance also lives in the daily refusal to let the system define every thought, every relationship, every custom, and every use of the body. It can be subtle, patient, clever, and maddeningly hard for power to measure. You begin to see it in the fields. A tool moves no faster than necessary. A task is done well, but not generously. A basket is lifted with care rather than haste. A worker straightens slowly, taking one more breath before bending again. None of this is theatrical. That is the point. The plantation wants labour pulled from the body as efficiently as possible. The body answers with calculation. Energy is conserved where it can be. Time is stretched in tiny increments. Motion is managed with intelligence. To an outsider, it may look like fatigue alone. Fatigue is certainly there. But sometimes slowness is also judgment. This is not laziness. It is self-preservation. It is also a quiet rejection of the idea that every ounce of strength belongs to the owner. The field holds many forms of this kind of refusal. A row completed carefully rather than quickly. A pace adjusted when supervision drifts farther away. An implement repaired just enough to continue, but not improved beyond necessity. A worker who knows how much can be held back without inviting punishment. Such acts require delicate skill. Push too far, and the penalty may be severe. Yield too much, and the body becomes more exhausted than it must. Resistance under close control is often a matter of measuring risk within a few heartbeats. You hear it in speech as well. A joke slips by. That sounds harmless to white ears and sharp to black ones. A phrase carries two meanings at once. A warning is delivered in the form of gossip. An insult is hidden inside politeness with almost artistic precision. Language can become a shelter and a blade. In communities made from many African backgrounds, Creole forms, regional accents, and shared verbal habits create social worlds not always legible to the plantation's rulers. Even when people are forced into the owner's language, they do not use it in the owner's way alone. Tone, timing, proverb, rhythm, and coded reference all open room for meanings that travel safely among the cabins and pass by the big house unnoticed. A laugh at the right moment can be resistance. So can silence. Silence matters because information is valuable. Owners and overseers want to know who said what, who plans to visit whom, who is unhappy, who might run, who has heard a rumour from another estate. Black communities answer by deciding what not to reveal. A person questioned may offer only what is safe. A child may be taught never to repeat certain conversations outside the cabin row. A meeting can be described as accidental when it was carefully arranged. Silence here is not emptiness. It is disciplined protection. Movement, as two, can resist. A visit to another cabin after dark may be more than a visit. It may be the stitching together of kin and community across the distances imposed by labour schedules and surveillance. A trip to fetch water can become a chance to pass news. A walk to the edge of the property can serve as lookout, courtship, grief, or planning, depending on who is present and what has happened that day. The plantation tries to control movement because movement makes social life possible. And social life is the seedbed of every larger refusal. Then there is the preservation of custom, a hairstyle chosen deliberately, a food seasoned in a familiar way, a child given a name with memory behind it, a rhythm tapped on a leg while waiting in the dark, a story told with an old lesson hidden inside it. These things may seem gentle rather than defiant, yet in a system determined to strip identity down to labour value, cultural continuity is itself a form of resistance. To remember is to refuse total capture. To teach a child a proverb, a plant use, a prayer style, or a song pattern that the plantation did not authorize is to say that another world still exists inside this one. Children take part in resistance too, though in smaller and more fragile ways. They learn who can be trusted. They carry messages disguised as errands. They play games that echo adult tensions without fully understanding them. They memorize names, paths, warnings, and tiny household rules that keep the community less exposed. A child told not to answer certain questions from certain people is already being trained in defensive knowledge. That should sober anyone who still imagines plantation childhood as merely simple labour with a few sad edges around it. There are stronger forms of resistance as well. Tools can be damaged. Equipment can be misplaced. Animals can be handled in ways that slow the day. Fire, the most ordinary servant of plantation life, can become dangerous if carelessly or deliberately directed. Theft of food, cloth, tools, or time can function as recovery from a system founded on theft itself. These actions vary in risk and intention. Some are impulsive, some are strategic, some are born from desperation. Some arise from a deep moral conviction that taking back from the plantation is no wrong at all. One small but telling detail appears again and again in the study of slavery. Owners often complain that enslaved people are deceitful, idle, careless, or sly, as though these were strange defects of character rather than predictable responses to coercion. There is almost something funny in their confusion. Build a world from violence, then act puzzled when honesty does not bloom naturally within it. The plantation mistakes compliance for virtue and resistance for moral failure. Black people, living inside the truth of the system, often judge the matter rather differently. Running away stands at the far edge of this daily pattern, sometimes temporary, sometimes intended to be permanent. A person may flee for a night to visit kin, avoid punishment, or breathe outside the plantation's reach for a few hours. Others may try for longer escape into woods, swamps, towns, or distant colonies. The risks are enormous. Patrols, dogs, hunger, weather, injury, unfamiliar roads, and betrayal all stand in the path. Yet flight continues because the desire not to be owned is stronger than the likelihood of comfort. Even a short absence can declare something powerful. You may claim my labour, but you do not own my consent. The woods carry a different feeling from the plantation yard. Cooler air, wet leaves, the smell of bark, mud, and water, sounds that are harder to interpret at night. A branch snaps and the heart lifts. A distant owl calls and then all is still again. To hide there, even briefly, requires courage and local knowledge, which ground stays dry, which streams can hide tracks, which paths lead somewhere useful rather than nowhere at all. Community sometimes support such movement with food, information, or temporary shelter when they can, not always. Fear is real, consequences are harsh. But mutual aid grows wherever people see one another clearly enough. Poisoning rumours also travel through slave societies, though the truth behind any particular accusation can be difficult to know. White fears about enslaved cooks, healers, and servants often produce stories full of panic and exaggeration. Sometimes accusations are false, shaped by racism and hysteria. Sometimes genuine acts of covert retaliation may lie beneath them. Historians still argue over many such cases because the evidence is tangled and often written by those eager to magnify black danger while ignoring white brutality. What matters here is the atmosphere of tension. White authority understands, at some level, that domination breeds hidden enemies. Resistance can also take the form of care. That may sound gentle, but it's not politically small. To raise a child with love in a world built on degradation is resistance. To keep someone alive through illness with herbs, broth, and patience is resistance. To marry us mourn, joke, sing, and remember under constant threat is resistance. To insist that another person is kin, not inventory, is resistance. The plantation depends on isolation. It works best when people are too exhausted, frightened, or divided to act for one another. Every gesture that strengthens community weakens that isolation. A shared meal can do this. So can a warning passed quickly before patrols arrive. So can standing near someone who has just been humiliated, giving them back a little human shape after the system tried to strip it away. Public defiance is not the only courage available. Sometimes the bravest act is refusing to let another person disappear morally in front of your eyes. Religion carries resistance too, though often in coded or inward forms. A prayer for deliverance, a biblical story told with unusual emphasis, a song that holds sorrow and expectation in the same breath. An ancestor remembered when the plantation wants only present labour. Faith does not always lead to overt rebellion, but it can preserve a moral framework in which slavery never becomes normal. That is no small thing. Systems of oppression survive partly by persuading people that injustice is simply how the world works. Spiritual life can interrupt that lie. You can feel this in gatherings that seem harmless from a distance. A few voices, a low song, a pause after a prayer, eyes meeting in the dim light. No one says the whole truth aloud because no one needs to. Shared understanding often arrives with very few words. Women often carry forms of resistance that the written record fails to honour properly. They preserve food knowledge, midwifery, healing, childcare, naming traditions, kin networks, and the daily emotional structure of survival. They hide objects, remember who belongs where, pass warnings, and keep social ties intact under impossible strain. Because these actions look domestic, white observers often underestimate their significance. That is their mistake. Domestic life is one of the main places where slavery is either reproduced or quietly undermined. Women, especially older women, often hold the line there with astonishing discipline. Men may resist through slowed labour, sabotage, covert travel, refusal under strain, or simply by maintaining authority within family and community spaces that slavery tries to strip away. But no neat division should be trusted too much. Everyone improvises according to role, age, chance, and danger. The field hand, the cook, the driver, the child, the healer, the carpenter, the mother, the elder, all occupy different angles of the same pressure, and each develops forms of reply. One curious thing about resistance is how often it leaves only partial traces. A broken tool in an archive tells you little about motive. A planter's complaint about insolence tells you more about his ego than about the exact scene. A runaway notice records height, clothing, scars, and supposed character, yet it cannot fully capture the thought that finally pushed a person onto the road. Much of resistance remains partly hidden because secrecy was often necessary for survival. Historians know it existed in abundance, but the details slip in and out of view like lantern light through trees. Even humour can become a weapon against the plantation's claim to seriousness. A pompous owner mocked behind his back, an overseer imitated with wicked accuracy in the safety of trusted company. A grand speech reduced to one sharp line that sends a cabin into muffled laughter. Laughter is risky because it restores perspective. It reminds people that the master is not a god, only a man with too much power and often not enough sense, by night. The plantation likes to imagine it has settled everything. Labour has ended, bodies are accounted for, paths are quiet. Orders have been obeyed, more or less. But inside the cabins and in the spaces between them, another story continues. News is exchanged, feelings are sorted, warnings are offered, memories are protected, plans, however small, begin to form. The day's control loosens just enough for the inner life of the community to breathe, and that breathing is resistance too, because slavery wants more than work. It wants surrender. It wants the mind to accept the cage as natural. It wants memory to go dim. It wants the future to feel impossible. Black Americans on early plantations answer in 100 ways, by preserving culture, by protecting kin, by slowing the hand, by sharpening the tongue, by withholding trust, by helping the fugitive, by mocking the arrogant, by praying beyond the master's theology, by teaching children truths too important to say loudly, by surviving without confusing survival for agreement. So when you think about resistance in 1730, do not look only for the loudest scene. Look for the held glance. Look for the extra minute stolen back from the field. Look for the hidden herb bundle, the whispered warning, the careful silence, the road taken after dark. Look for the way a community keeps making people out of those the plantation tries to reduce to property. That is resistance in its daily clothes, unfinished, risky, persistent, and powerful enough that the entire plantation system must keep guarding against it every waking hour. Night settles over the plantation with a patience that daylight never shows. The fields lose their hard edges first. Rows blur into darker bands of earth. Fences become lines felt more than seen. Trees gather into solid shapes against the sky. The yard cools by slow degrees, releasing the heat it held all day. Dust sinks. Insects take over the soundscape with their steady, needling chorus. Frogs call from damp places. Somewhere farther off, water moves with a low, secretive hush. The air smells of cooling soil, smoke from the cabins, old wood, and the faint sweetness of crushed plants bruised under many feet. You stand in that dimness and feel what the day has left behind in the body. The shoulders are heavy, the hands ache, the feet pulse with dull heat, the back carries its own private weather. Labour does not vanish when the work stops. It remains in the joints, in the stiffness of the neck, in the slow way people lower themselves to sit. Exhaustion changes how voices sound. It removes ornament. Even laughter comes from deeper in the chest, less bright, but perhaps more honest. And yet night is not empty. It is full of things the plantation ledger cannot hold. You hear low voices outside the cabins, drifting in and out with the insect song. A child asks a final question before sleep and receives an answer softened by fatigue. Someone coughs. Someone clears a throat. Someone hums while shaking out a blanket. The fire inside a cabin gives off the small crackle of settling wood. A pot is moved from the coals. The smell of ash and warm meal hangs close to the doorway. Ordinary sounds. Immense sounds. They announce that life continues after labour, and that continuation is its own quiet insistence. Night is when the plantation appears to loosen, though it never truly releases its grip. The big house may still glow through a window or two. A dog may bark without warning. A rider may pass on the road. A patrol may exist somewhere beyond sight, enough to alter choices even when unseen. Fear does not sleep deeply here. It dozes with one eye open, but within that uncertainty, black life expands into the spaces left by official work. People mend, soothe, speak, remember, and simply sit with one another long enough to feel human again. That feeling matters. It may be temporary, it may be fragile, it may be interrupted, but it matters. You notice how darkness changes what can be said. Some conversations belong to night because daytime is too exposed. News travels in a quieter register. A remark about a nearby plantation, a warning about a man on horseback, a hint that someone is ill, a question about a relative, a memory brought out with care. Night does not make speech fully safe, but it makes it softer at the edges. And sometimes soft edges are enough. Inside a cabin, shadows move gently against the walls. Firelight turns the rough boards amber, then brown, then black again as the flames shift. A child's face glows for a second and then disappears into dimness. Blanket smell of smoke, skin, and old cloth. The dirt floor holds the last warmth near the hearth and the first coolness near the door. Bodies settle into familiar places. The room is crowded, but the crowding has its own comfort when the world outside is so hostile. Breath becomes part of the atmosphere. One person turns, another sighs. A hand reaches out in the dark and finds another shoulder or wrist, only for a moment, then rests. Sleep never arrives simply. There is too much to remember, too much to anticipate, too much pain that wakes when the body finally stops moving. A knee stiffens, a blister rubs, a cramp visits the calf. The mind revisits a harsh word from the day, or a face that looked troubled, or the strange silence of someone who did not speak at supper. Worry lies down beside you as readily as any blanket. Will tomorrow bring punishment? Will someone be sold? Will the child stop coughing? Will the crop demand harder labour? Will the owner return angry from town? The questions do not ask permission before entering the room. Still, people sleep. Human beings are stubborn that way. The body will claim what rest it can, and in rest, dreams come. No plantation controls dreams with perfect success. Dreams may return a person to another coast, another river, another mother's voice. They may replay the day in distorted form. They may offer absurd comfort. A table full of food, a road with no patrol, a baby laughing, a face long absent appearing whole again. They may also disturb, of course. Night does not belong only to sweetness. But even troubled dreams prove something important. The inner life remains active beyond command. One of the quiet truths of plantation life is that records almost never preserve evenings properly. Ledgers can count barrels, hands, acres, and output. They can note punishments, births, deaths, purchases, and sales. They can tell you how much tobacco cured or how much rice shipped. What they cannot do is capture the texture of a cabin settling into night. They cannot hear the low joke that lifts a weary room. They cannot smell the herbs crushed into a healing cloth. They cannot feel the pause after a whispered prayer. They cannot measure the way a mother watches a sleeping child as if memorizing them against uncertainty. That private watchfulness may be one of the deepest emotions in the room. A parent looks, an elder listens, a partner waits until another's breathing deepens. Care continues even after labour should have consumed every usable ounce of energy. This is one reason the plantation never fully succeeds in making property out of persons. Property is not supposed to love back, mourn forward, save the better portion, or stay awake to notice a fever. Human beings do, constantly, outside. The stars hang over the plantation with almost irritating beauty. They are too calm for such a place, too vast, too indifferent to rank. The same sky spreads over the field hand, the cook, the driver, the child, the owner, the horse, the road, the river, and the distant town. There is something quietly unsettling in that equality. The plantation arranges every visible detail to separate people sharply, yet the sky refuses to cooperate. Night has its own opinions. A cool breeze passes through the yard and slips through the cabin cracks. It touches the skin lightly, carrying the scent of water and leaves from beyond the cleared land. For a moment, the smell is different from the plantation smell, wilder, less handled. It hints at worlds outside fences and schedules. Woods, marsh, creek, open road. Possibility travels most easily at night because possibility is harder to see clearly then. That can make it frightening. It can also make it precious. Some people remain awake longer than others. The very old, the anxious, the sick, the ones with infants, the ones with something heavy on the mind. They sit near fading embers or just inside the doorway where the air moves better. Their thoughts may wander through years and losses that younger people do not yet fully know. They may think about Africa, if they remember it directly. They may think about another plantation, another county, another family connection carried mostly in story now. They may think about what it means to grow older, in a place designed to use strength first and ask questions never. Age has its own dignity here, and its own sorrow. An elder may not be pushed in the field the same way as the young, but aging under slavery is not gentle. The body keeps the score of years of labour with embarrassing precision, scarred hands, bent fingers, clouded eyes, a limp that never quite leaves. Yet elders also hold memory, and memory gives shape to the community when the plantation would prefer everyone exist only in the present tense of work. An old person can say who married whom, who came from which ship or region, who survived a fever, who once ran and returned, who sings like her mother used to sing. In the nighttime hush, such memory has authority. There are small rituals before sleep as well, a child covered more fully, ash banked over coals, a door checked, a bowl set aside for morning, a charm touched briefly, a final cup of water, a whispered phrase of blessing. These acts calm the mind because they create order in a world where larger order is unjust and unstable. Do this, then lie down, then breathe, then trust the dark as much as it can be trusted. A quirky detail found in archaeology and oral tradition alike is how often people tucked meaningful objects into sleeping spaces or near hearths. Shells, beads, scraps, roots, coins, pins. Little things that seem too small to matter until you remember that small things often carry the heaviest feeling. Historians still debate the exact meanings of many such objects, because material traces do not arrive with labels attached, but the pattern itself is telling. People surrounded themselves with tokens of protection, memory, beauty, or intention. The sleeping place was never only a place to collapse. It was also a place where the self gathered itself again. The longer you stand in imagination within this night, the clearer one fact becomes. Plantation life is not only a story of public suffering, it is also a story of private endurance. The public part is easier for records to capture because power writes loudly. The private part survives in fragments, in songs, in family memory, in excavated objects, in patterns of care, in the stubborn recurrence of tenderness where tenderness had every reason to disappear. The plantation fears many things. It fears revolt. It fears flight. It fears poor harvests and bad markets. But perhaps it also fears this quieter persistence. The way people keep making community after every insult. The way mothers keep naming children carefully. The way elders keep teaching. The way lovers keep finding one another in dim yards. The way grief never quite turns into acceptance. The way humour slips under the door. The way prayer alters the atmosphere of a room. The way a people made into property by law continue behaving like a people. Night shows this most clearly because performance drops away. Daytime requires posture. Night allows truth to breathe. In that truth, you see that black Americans on early plantations in 1730 were not merely surviving from one command to the next. They were building moral worlds under pressure, worlds of kinship, memory, skill, caution, belief, and hope. Small worlds, perhaps, measured against the power above them. Yet those worlds were real enough to comfort a child, protect a secret, preserve a custom, or carry a person's name beyond the reach of a sales ledger. Now the yard grows quieter still. The last conversation trails off. A baby finally settles. The fire gives one soft crack. Crickets hold the night together with their patient rhythm. The stars remain. You understand, standing here at the edge of sleep and history, that the plantation can account for labour, but never for the full human cost of extracting it. It can record bodies without understanding souls. It can punish, divide, threaten, and profit. Yet it cannot fully extinguish the inner arrangements by which people remain themselves and remain one another's people. That is what remains when the noise drops. Not the owner's authority, not the crop alone, not the arithmetic of profit. What remains is the living residue of ordinary black life under extraordinary oppression, the tenderness, the weariness, the wit, the discipline, the ache, the memory, the love carried carefully through danger, the unglamorous heroism of waking, working, feeding, guarding, teaching, mourning, and lying down once more in a world that has not been made safe. And as the darkness settles fully around the cabins, you feel the truth of it with unusual calm. These lives were constrained, watched, and violated by the system enclosing them, but they were also lived, fully, painfully, intelligently, and with a depth no plantation record could ever master. Now let the night soften further. Let the insects grow gentler at the edges. Let the air cool your thoughts. Imagine the fire sinking into a bed of quiet red. Imagine the rough cabin walls holding only hush now, and the breathing of those asleep within them becoming the truest sound in the world. The day's harshness is still real, but it is farther away for this moment. The tools are still. The road is empty. The sky watches from above with patient silver distance. Every tired body has found some place to rest. Every whispered fear has loosened its grip a little. Every small act of care completed before sleep now lingers like warmth in the dark. You do not need to hold every fact any longer. You can let the names, the fields, the smoke, and the low voices drift together. You can picture the stars over the plantation, wide and calm, untouched by the fences below. You can feel the ground cooling, the night deepening, and the long breath of history growing softer. And as the cabins fall silent one by one, and the last ember fades to a faint red eye in the ashes, you can let this world recede gently into darkness, carrying with it its sorrow, its strength, and its quiet human grace.